Demonstrations continue this Monday in Chile's capital Santiago to show support for the Mapuche community. Chinese authorities have called on the United States to stop politicizing economic and trade issues. Israeli fighter jets bombed Hamas facilities in the center and south of the besieged Gaza Strip early Monday morning. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Chile, where demonstrations continue this Monday in the capital Santiago to show support for the Mapuche community. Chileans gathered on several of the main avenues of the city. The protests were sparked by the arrest of 48 Mapuches, including 12 children, during violent evictions that took place in the municipalities of Victoria, Traiguén and Curacautín on Sunday. Protesters have rejected the Chilean government's position regarding the demands of the Mapuche community, while blaming President Sebastián Piñera for the violent acts committed in recent days. And demonstrations were also seen in the commune of La Granja in the south of the Santiago metropolitan region. Supporters called for the liberation of Mapuche political prisoners who are on hunger strike in several Chilean prisons. Spiritual leader Celestino Córdoba is one of the main figures among the prisoners who's been on hunger strike for over 90 days. Meanwhile, Mapuche activist Jorge Huachala FtS has noted that Mapuche political prisoners have risked their lives in order to secure a dialogue with Chilean President Sebastián Piñera.
The protests aim also to political prisoners who put in risk their lives, that put their bodies as a bargaining chip in order to reach a dialogue. It is unbelievable. The government is determined to carry out a military intervention bigger than the one we have already here for several years, with the militarization and the permanent aggression to our communities.
And as the protests continue in Chile against attacks on Mapuche communities by right-wing groups, as well as heavy repression by state security forces, our correspondent Alejandro Kurt brings us more details on the events over the past few days.
Yes, the events of Saturday night have triggered a lot of reactions in the country. Demonstrations by Mapuche communities in several towns of the Wallmapu, the Mapuche country, Concepción, Valdivia, Temuco, Traiguén and Cochipulli, where a truck was burned this morning. All of them met with heavy repression, as it is usual in Chile, by the militarized police. The Human Rights Commissions of both chambers of parliament have announced a joint investigation on the role of the new Interior Minister, Víctor Pérez, who was in the region when these events took place, in what happened. And what happened was right-wing mobs organized by paramilitary groups allegedly attacked several town halls simultaneously, which had been seized by Mapuche activists. The role of racism in Chilean society has been largely ignored, and it's part of the constitutional debate that is taking place in the country now.
Thank you, Alejandro. And we move on to Brazil now, where President Jair Bolsonaro's chief of staff has tested positive for COVID-19, as the total number of coronavirus cases confirmed in the country surpassed 2.7 million this Monday. Army General Walter Sousa Braga Neto is the 7th Brazilian minister to have contracted the virus, but is reported to be asymptomatic. According to a statement, the official will remain in isolation until a further examination and medical evaluation is carried out, but will continue to work remotely. Brazil's health crisis shows no signs of slowing, as the nation continues to be the second hardest hit in the world after the United States. The official COVID-19 death toll has now surpassed 94,000, according to Health Ministry data. Social, union and political movements in Bolivia began roadblocks as part of a general strike in rejection of the decision to postpone the general elections. During the early morning hours of this Monday, protesters set up street blockades in Cochabamba, Oruro, San Julián and other cities of the country. They're calling on the de facto government installed following the coup last year to return to the agreed election date of September 6. The mobilizations are part of an indefinite general strike called by the Bolivian Workers' Movement, the Central Trade Union Federation of the country, along with other workers, campesino and indigenous organizations. And former Bolivian President Evo Morales took to Twitter to denounce the de facto regime's political persecution against Juan Carlos Guarachi, Executive Secretary of the Bolivian Workers' Center, and Betty Yaniquez, head of the MAS IPSP parliamentary bloc. He stressed that Bolivian workers would defend their union and their political rights. After a 3-month break, British Airlines Virgin Atlantic began welcoming customers back on board this Saturday with the first passenger flight to Barbados. The flight from London Heathrow landed at Grantley Adams International Airport at 5 p.m. To ensure the health and safety of passengers and crew, the airline implemented additional measures at the airport and on board. As travel restrictions around the world begin to relax and travel demand increases, Virgin Atlantic announced it will add more Caribbean routes from October, including Montego Bay, Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago. The Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association has called for the immediate closure of all primary schools. The call was issued following the increase in COVID-19 cases in people who have not had any history of recent travel. Several students have been infected in at least 4 schools. In a statement, the union's president stressed that the continued increase in COVID-19 cases across the country is viewed with great concern. The situation has significantly impacted students who are preparing for the secondary school entrance exam. And we'll be right back after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. We begin with our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmero, who brings us a roundup of news from the Caribbean region.
Thanks for the contact. These are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. And let's start with Guyana and its new president that was elected on 2nd March 2020. 5 months after a general election, the opposition candidate Irfan Ali has been sworn in Guyana as president. Following allegations of vote tampering, a recount, and a lengthy legal battle, the Election Commission declared Mr. Ali the winner on Sunday, and he was sworn in hours later. His rival, outgoing President David Granger, said he would take his allegations of fraud to the High Court. The discovery of huge oil reserves in Guyanese waters over the past years meant that the election was much more closely watched than previous ones, as the new president will be the one to administer the windfall resulting from the find.
Thank you very much. Chancellor of the Judiciary, members of the diplomatic community, former President Jack Dale, leaders and executive of the People's Progressive Party, fellow Guyanese, today I stand before you humbled at this opportunity to serve you. I just took the oath of office. I want to assure you that I will uphold that oath, that I would work every day in the best interests of the people of Guyana.
Let's take a look to the most recent cases on COVID-19 in Costa Rica and Jamaica. The Costa Rica Ministry of Health suspended until 2021 all activities involving mass gatherings, including sporting events, concerts, or any other activity to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Concerts by musical groups that had already changed their dates for the end of this year will have to reschedule for 2021, as well as sports competitions such as the Vuelta Ciclista a Costa Rica, Patron Saint festivities, carnivals, and other massive festive events. Local media report that the official decision is contained in a document issued by the Ministry of Health called Temporary Administrative Measures for the Care of Mass Rally Activities due to the health alert by COVID-19. Given this measure, a statement from the Chamber of Prompters and Related Mass Events reveals that they are in communication with the artists' offices to choose new dates for the events scheduled for this year, so that Costa Rica continues to be part of the new tours planned for next year. Jamaica recorded 2 new COVID-19 related deaths last Sunday. One of the deceased is a 64-year-old male from Clarendon and another is a 73-year-old female from St. Thomas. The total number of COVID-19 related deaths is now 12. At the same time, 11 new samples have been confirmed positive for COVID-19. The total number of confirmed COVID-19 cases for Jamaica stands at 894. The newly confirmed cases include 7 females and 4 males with ages ranging from 13 to 73 years. 2 of the cases were imported, having arrived recently on flights from USA and the Dominican Republic. Jamaica now has 90 active cases under observation with 2 moderately ill patients. There are no critical ill cases. Recoveries remain at 743, while 49 cases have been repatriated to their countries of origin. These are the most recent stories and news from Caribbean countries. Let's go back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Laura. And moving to China now, where authorities have called on the United States to stop politicizing economic and trade issues after US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently announced that measures would be taken against Chinese apps like TikTok due to supposed national security concerns.
The US is using an abused concept of national security and, without providing any evidence, is making presumptions of guilt and issuing threats to relevant companies. This goes against the principle of market economy and exposes the hypocrisy and typical double standards of the US in upholding so-called fairness and freedom. It also violates the WTO's principle of openness, transparency, and non-discrimination. China is firmly opposed to this.
And China suspended Hong Kong's extradition treaty with New Zealand after its government joined other Western powers in suspending the extradition treaty with Hong Kong, citing concerns over the new national security law.
New Zealand, on the pretext of China's passage of the law on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, has recently unilaterally suspended its agreements with Hong Kong on fugitive transfer. New Zealand's relevant practices politicize Hong Kong's judicial cooperation, grossly interfere in China's internal affairs, seriously violate international law and the basic norms of international relations, as well as seriously damaging the foundation for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Regions to carry out judicial cooperation, and deviates from the purpose of safeguarding justice and the rule of law via judicial cooperation. Therefore, China has decided to suspend the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region's fugitive transfer agreements and agreements on mutual legal assistance in criminal matters with New Zealand. China is firmly opposed to the New Zealand's wrong move.
More than 2,000 firefighters were battling a blaze that was burning out of control this Monday in Southern California, threatening thousands of people and homes east of Los Angeles. The wildfire, which broke out Friday near the city of San Bernardino, has so far burnt more than 8,000 hectares. According to the United States Forest Service, record low moisture, low humidity and high temperatures are fueling the blaze. At least 2,600 homes and nearly 7,800 people were evacuated. Vietnamese authorities have placed a second city into lockdown after 3 new COVID-19 cases were confirmed on Sunday.
It is very unfortunate that there have been people dying of COVID-19 in Vietnam, but there are people who have been suffering severe illness for a long time, and the virus was the fuel to further deteriorate their health condition. As for me, I would always wear a mask to protect myself. For those who have been in areas with outbreak, they must go to test for the virus. I'm worried that COVID-19 outbreak has returned to the country. I have always been reminding myself to wear a mask, wash my hands frequently, and avoid crowded places.
Russian Industry and Trade Minister Denis Manturov announced that the country will produce hundreds of thousands of monthly doses of its COVID-19 vaccine this year and more than 1 million in 2021. The minister noted that the amount will initially depend on the demand of the national health system, but starting next year, several million monthly doses could be manufactured. In this context, the Russian Direct Investment Fund announced that Russia will supply a drug developed to treat COVID-19 patients to Argentina, Bolivia, Ecuador, Uruguay, Paraguay, Honduras and El Salvador. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has reacted to the surge in COVID-19 cases in the country with a virtual message, in which he reminded Germans of the importance of following health and safety guidelines to fight the virus.
Aber der Zwischenerfolg darf uns nicht leichtsinnig machen.
Our original success must not make us reckless. The summer mood is good for us all, but it must not lead us to become careless in our fight against the pandemic. For we can see these days how uncertain and shaky the situation still is. No, the pandemic is not over. It is not gone. We are in the middle of it. The number of infections in Germany has risen again. The irresponsibility of a few puts us all at risk. If we are not particularly careful now, we will endanger the health of many, and we are also endangering the recovery of our society, our economy, and our cultural life.
A group of 200 migrants on 8 barges arrived overnight in the Italian island of Lampedusa. The island has now seen the arrival of over 5,500 migrants in the past 2 weeks. According to Mayor of Lampedusa, Salvatore Martello, the official told local media that 250 boats have landed on the island, a few miles off the coast of Libya and Tunisia. Many of the migrants that arrived in recent days have been transferred to other parts of Italy. However, there are currently about 900 being held in the island's reception centre, which only has capacity for 100. Nearly 2 years since the Morandi bridge disaster, Genoa is preparing for the inauguration ceremony of its replacement. While the Genoa St George Bridge reconnects the city's two sides and gives new life to the area, local residents and the families of those who died in the collapse on August 14, 2018 are still waiting for justice. The disaster forced the evacuation of nearby residents from the densely built-up area. The accident is considered the deadliest in a series of bridge disasters that exposed the state of Italy's aging road infrastructure.
The dimension of what we were exploring was really massive, about 80,000 tons of concrete, at 50 to 92 meters high, in the middle of the town. Actually, to mitigate the effect of the dust, we used a very immense amount of water we created artificially the rain that day.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. According to Palestinian agencies, Israeli fighter jets bombed Hamas facilities in the centre and south of the besieged Gaza Strip early Monday morning. Local media added that the occupying Israeli regime fired 3 missiles at a building of the resistance forces in the west of Rafah city. The Israeli army claimed that the bombing of Gaza was in response to rocket attacks made by resistance groups. Hamas spokesperson Farsi Barum denounced that the Israeli attacks are aimed at diverting attention from the deteriorating political and economic situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and mark an escalation of the violence. Syrian authorities described an agreement reached between Kurdish militias and an oil company based in the United States as illegal and invalid, noting that the move aims at stealing Syria's oil resources. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs pointed out that the agreements constitute an attack on Syria's sovereignty and a continuation of the hostile policy of the United States. Meanwhile, Turkish authorities have also condemned the deal, which was signed between the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and the Delta Crescent Energy Corporation. United States Senator Lindsey Graham announced late in June that the deal sought to modernize oil fields in northeast Syria.
We have another option to them.
United Nations officials warned on Monday of a possible humanitarian disaster in Libya, given the coronavirus pandemic and the possibility of military operations in the city of Sirte.
The UN remains concerned about a possible humanitarian disaster in Libya should the current escalation and mobilization around Sirte lead to military operations. The lives of more than 125,000 people in and around Sirte are at great risk. COVID-19 cases continue to increase across Libya, with 3,837 cases reported and 83 deaths to date, most of them in the western and southern parts of the country. Capacity for testing, tracing, and treating people remains extremely low across the country and continues to be concentrated in Tripoli and Benghazi.
The Tehran Stock Exchange may have acted as a buffer to prevent one of the worst economic disasters for Iran, an analyst reported on Monday. On Sunday, the stock exchange crossed 2 million points for the first time, even as US sanctions, unemployment, inflation and low oil prices battered the Iranian economy. The Tehran Stock Exchange has seen sharp increases this year, despite the country struggling with one of the first serious coronavirus outbreaks outside of China. Lebanese Foreign Minister Nassif Hiti submitted his resignation to the Prime Minister this Monday. According to a government source, Prime Minister Hassan Diab and President Michel Aoun held consultations regarding the resignation to consider the following steps. According to local media, Lebanon is witnessing the worst economic crisis in its history, coinciding with the plunge of the local currency to more than half of its value, with the high rate of inflation pushing nearly half of the population below the poverty line. On Monday, at least 2 people died and 1 was wounded in a suspected suicide bombing outside a restaurant in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. According to police officials and witnesses, the blast occurred at the entrance of the restaurant, where a security guard stopped the suicide bomber before he detonated the bomb. The restaurant, close to Mogadishu port, is popular with security officers and government officials working in the nearby area, who are regularly targeted for assassination by Islamist militants. So far, no group has claimed responsibility for the attack.
A vigilant security guard for the restaurant stopped the suicide bomber from getting inside the restaurant. The bomber suddenly blew himself up outside of the bar, as you can see. 3 people, including the suicide bomber, died in the attack, and 2 other people were also injured in the explosion.
On August 3, 1960, the Republic of Niger gained its independence from France, the same year declared by UNESCO as the Year of Africa, given the independence of 17 African nations, that highlighted the growing Pan-African sentiments in the continent. We take a look back at some of the history.
Niger is a landlocked country in West Africa whose territory has been the cradle of most relevant empires of the continent: the Songhai, the Malian, and the Kanem-Bornu. In 1885, the process known as the Scramble for Africa culminated in the Berlin Conference, in which the colonial powers outlined the division of Africa into spheres of influence. As a result, France gained control of the upper valley of the Niger River and extended its rule on the territory for 75 years. During that time, the country was submerged into a colonial structure known as the French West Africa, a sort of federation of colonial territories that comprised almost a third of the continent. However, on 1958, after various attempts, an autonomous Republic of Niger was created. But 2 years later, the country decided to fully leave the French community and gain its independence on August 3, 1960, led by the Pan-Africanist leader Hamani Diori.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesu English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.